All right, we'll begin with this relatively easy question. It's a question about Torah study. Dear Rabbi Allouche, question for tonight. I'm studying Torah with Rabbi Karsh, a colleague of mine in Chicago, a great rabbi.
Yeah, my rabbi.
Right, there you go. So the question is it okay to write in the Chumash? As you study, you're writing notes in the Chumash, I suppose. I use my Steinsaltz Chumash. Is it okay to write notes? So as long as we are writing notes that are holy, in other words, that are in line with the holiness of the Chumash and with the holiness of the words, then sure, it's not a problem to write in the Chumash. In fact, I don't know if you visited the Museum of Israel. I remember it struck me, but I remember seeing, I think it was notes from the times of the Ibn Ezra, it dates back to the 12th century. But he wrote in Chumashes. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, who was the father of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Yaktrinoslav, he was sent to exile. The only way he can write his commentaries was to write also on the pages of holy books. So as long as our writings are in line with the holiness of the content of the book, then absolutely. If you are writing on a Chumash, just summaries of some secular issue, or if you took a Chumash with you, because that's what we do as Jews. Everywhere we go, we take a Chumash with us, a Torah book with us. And you happen to walk into a Harkins and watch a movie and you want to write notes about the movie on the Chumash, I don't know if that's appropriate. It's great that you took a Chumash into Harkins. That's great. But again, so everyone has to consider what he or she thinks is appropriate for the holiness of the Chumash. But otherwise,
but not on Shabbat. But not on Shabbat.
Of course, yeah, not on Shabbat. Okay, excellent. All right, next question. All right, dear Rabbi, I'm going to skip the introduction. All right, I'm very disturbed by the current situation across America. These riots and this upheaval is not letting me sleep at night. I worry for the future of our country. What is the single most important thing that needs to change for our country to begin to heal? That's a great question, and I know we're all sharing the same sentiments these days. Indeed, these riots and this upheaval is deeply disturbing on so many levels. And I can empathize with this lovely lady who's writing these words. She can't sleep at night and she worries about the future of our country. I think many of us do. But what's the single most important thing that needs to change? I don't know if there's one single most important thing that needs to change. But if dare I say, if I had to pick one single most important thing that needs to change, I would say it's the narrative. The narrative on both sides. And as long as we are speaking about what is a person, instead of speaking about who is a person, we've missed the mark. And let me explain. I think many of us are guilty of speaking about the what's. What is a person? He's black, he's white, he's Caucasian, he's Asian. What is a person? He's Sephardic, Ashkenazic. We see it in the Jewish world too. He's Yemenite. That's the what. Who is a person? His attributes, his qualities, his personality, his skills, his talents. That's what a person is. That's the who. The problem is, I think that on both sides, on the racist side, of course, people that are judging others based on the color of the skin, on their what's. And on the other side too, the Black Lives Matter, I think also are guilty in that level, that
Absolutely.
they speak about Black lives.
Absolutely.
We're not speaking about the what's. Judaism does not speak about the what's. Judaism speaks about the who. Who is a person? Is divine. Who is a person? No, is not a body. And it's not a color of a body. It's a soul. Who is a person? An infinite potential. Who is a person? A divine spark in this world that has a unique purpose. Who is a person? An indispensable note in God's cosmic symphony. That's who a person is. And as long as we are speaking the language of the what and not the language of the who, then we have missed the mark. And I think if there's one single thing, again, there are many things that I can note. I wrote an article about this last week. But if there's one single thing, it's the narrative. That narrative will eventually change our perspective. That perspective will eventually change our actions. I think it was Margaret Thatcher or one of the British icons who said, maybe it was Winston Churchill himself, I don't recall, who said that watch your words, watch your thoughts because they become words, watch your words because they become actions, watch your actions because they become your character. So we have to think differently and we have to speak differently. When we speak differently, then our actions will change. When our actions will change, our character will change. So I think that's one singular thing that needs to change as soon as possible. Now, we can always, as many people do, of course, we love to blame others. Oh, this needs to change. Let them do this. I'm sorry. It starts with us. It starts with the way we look at our own family members. It starts at the way we look at our neighbors. It starts at the way we look at people that we bump into in the supermarket, at the gas station, wherever it may be. That's where it starts. It starts with us. Be the change that you want to be that you want to see in the world, as Gandhi famously said. It starts with us. Everyone has their role to play in this change of narrative. And so often, and I see the dichotomy, it blows my mind. It's hypocrisy in my mind. But I see people that are so vocal about, racism needs to be abolished. Great, very good. What about in your own family? What about the way you are treating right now your sister? No, that's different. Oh, 1 second, but that's where it starts. That's where it starts. Don't go out and preach the whole world what they need to do when you yourself can't even do it. That's where it starts. So the narrative needs to change within our own families, within our own relationships. I'm stunned each time I speak to crowds, and then you get to know people, and I'm really stunned at the number of people that don't speak to family members, that don't speak to their uncle, that don't speak to grandparents. Now is the time to repair your relationships. You want to repair the relationships with the world? Then start repairing the relationships with yourself, with your own families, with your own social units. That's where it really begins. Because as long as that narrative doesn't take place within, it won't be able to take place without. So it really starts with each and every one of us, and that's the narrative that really needs to change. That's one single thing. We can go on and on, but I want to get to the other questions. Okay, next question, which is also a lighter question. So, dear Rabbi, I've always wondered, why do we make a mark on the challah of Shabbat before eating it? So good question. So as many of you know, before we say the hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? Each time we eat, it doesn't have to be necessarily on Shabbat, but each time we eat bread, then we make a mark on the bread, a little mark with our knives, and then we say the blessing, and then we eat the bread. Why do we make the little mark? The answer really relates to halacha that says that when we say a blessing on anything, whether it's on food or on a tree or on God's beautiful creation, that blessing must relate to something very specific. Now, when I'm saying a blessing over an entire challah, then I'm really, and if I don't mark the challah, and if I don't say, well, this is the part of the challah that I'm going to eat, then my blessing is almost in vain because it's not pertaining to anything specific. And therefore, before we eat the challah, before we say the blessing and then we eat the challah, we mark the part of the challah that we are going to eat, again, so that the blessing can relate to something very specific as Jewish law guides us. Now, you can ask the question, why do blessings have to be said over something specific? Why can't I just say blessings over the entire challah, over the entire nature of God, over everything? And that's because I will quote a non-Jewish answer to answer a Jewish question. Cicero, the Roman emperor, said that when you are everywhere, you are nowhere. He also said that speaking about everything is speaking about nothing. Anyone who's a speechwriter, anyone who gives speeches, anyone who writes knows that if you don't condense your piece, your article into one specific idea, you'll lose the crowd. You've lost it. Because indeed, everywhere is nowhere. If I can't translate God's blessings into something very, very specific, something that I can hold on to, I won't feel the blessing. It will be too abstract for me to connect to it. It will be everywhere. And therefore, again, Judaism, Jewish law, asks us to be very specific about our blessings. Therefore, we mark that challah on Shabbat before we say the blessing over it, before eating it. I hope I was clear. Next question. So, dear Rabbi, I know, okay, I'm skipping a little bit, so I'm getting to the question directly. I know how much you love mitzvahs and people taking upon themselves just one more mitzvah. That is true. That's what makes me the most happy in the world, really, much more than anything. And therefore, I encourage everyone at all times. And I'm going to use this opportunity. Thank you for writing this, because I'm going to use this opportunity to ask everyone again to continue to take upon themselves just one more mitzvah. My rabbi says that human beings are like arrows, and arrows are either going up or going down. There's no status quo for arrows, just as there is no status quo for human beings. You're either climbing or you're falling. And if we don't climb and take upon ourselves one more mitzvah whenever we can and continue to go higher and higher, then we're actually falling. But in any case, you're right. So I love mitzvahs, and I encourage everyone to take upon themselves just one more mitzvah. Now, the question is this. Lately, my new mitzvah has been to pray every morning. Beautiful. I think there's no better way to start the day, by the way. Now, it's turned out to be the best thing I've done in my life. Well done. Now, just out of curiosity, what is your favorite prayer? A good question. So I will answer this person. I don't have a favorite prayer. It depends on the day. It really depends on the day. And I'm going to translate this because I don't like personal questions too much. I'm going to translate this into an actual piece of advice that is not from me, that is from my rabbi. I once asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, listen, I was a teenager, and it's still true today. What I felt then as a teenager is true today, 20 years later. But I remember asking him, look, it's impossible for me to concentrate and have full focus during my entire morning prayer, especially the morning prayer is the longest of the three prayers, longer than the afternoon, longer than the evening prayer. So it's impossible for me to have full focus on every word for that hour that it takes, or 45 minutes, whatever it is. So what do you suggest I do? And he said, you know what? That's fine. That happens to the best of us. Pick just one or two or three prayers before going into the morning prayer and make that your prayer of the day. So you don't have to pick everything. Pick pick one or two prayers, and you'll be able to, and if you can just dive into those prayers, those prayers will be your morning prayers. Those prayers will be the prayers of the day. So it's a long way to say I don't have a favorite prayer, but what I do is that I choose for myself my favorite prayers each and every day before going into the prayer. So today, for example, it was maybe an insignificant prayer. Today, I wanted to focus particularly on the Me'ir La'aretz Ve'Ladarim Alea, which the prayer that comes after Yishtabach. It's a beautiful prayer. It speaks of God's wonders in creation. Tomorrow, I don't know, I haven't decided yet. Might be a different prayer. So every day is a different prayer for me, and that's my answer to this question. Next question. So, dear Rabbi, okay, in your opinion, what is, I think it's connected somehow to the question of a few minutes ago. But in your opinion, what is the root of the problem with all of what is going on between the coronavirus and the uprising? Is God upset at us? Why has this year turned out to be so challenging? The root of the problem of both the coronavirus and the uprising, and is God upset at us? First, I don't think anyone can speak for God. I think no one knows God fully in order to be able to speak for God fully. And people who speak on behalf of God, just this past week, a rabbi in Israel came out, and it aggravates me each time I hear these things. Rabbi came out and he said, well, the coronavirus came to our world because people are not nice to each other. They're not careful about what they say. Now, could be true, could be not true. But to speak on behalf of God, to know God's mind, I don't think anyone can do. So unless this guy's a prophet, he's either a liar or a fool. I don't know if anyone can say anything on behalf of God. So I don't know if God is upset. I can't read God's mind. Maybe this rabbi can. I won't tell you his name because I just bashed him. So you look it up yourself. But is God upset at us? I don't know. Sometimes, it's interesting because sometimes we think that God is upset, but quite the opposite. It's a sign of love. And it's almost like when we discipline our children. Are we upset when we discipline our children? No, not necessarily. We try and educate them. And by the way, when you discipline your children, when you're upset, that's when you shouldn't discipline them. Because then they'll know that you are doing it to let go of your anger. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it because you're angry and you need an outlet for your anger. So you discipline them. So if you do it, if that's how you discipline your children will never get the message. Not only that, it will destroy them in the long run. So you can only discipline as a parent, as a good parent, you can only discipline your children when you are calm and calculated. And you've thought about the discipline you're about to give out so that it can be effective, so that it can be well received by the child. And usually that type of discipline comes from love. I believe that God is a good parent. And when he comes to discipline his society, he does that also in a calculated way, not because he's upset at us, as you just quoted, not because he's angry, because as a good parent, he calculates what he's about to do. And he says, you know what, I love my children, I care for them so much. I'll give them A, B, and C. So I don't think God is upset. I think many sufferings that we've had throughout our history were not because God was upset. The picture that symbolizes the most is when Titus came and destroyed the second temple. He stormed into the Holy of Holies. He did all sorts of things there, prostitutes, and tore Torah scrolls in there. He wanted to defile the Holy of Holies as much as he could. But what's interesting is that the sages point out that when he entered the Holy of Holies, a place where the ark was, he found the cherubim on top of the ark, those two statues of baby faces and angels, facing one another. Why was this such a big wonder? Because the sages teach us in a different place that when God was upset with his people, those cherubim would miraculously turn around, would not be facing one another. Yet when God was destroying the temple through Titus, the faces were facing one another. How can you explain that? The destruction of the temple is a sign that God is seemingly upset at us. But no, discipline does not mean upset. Discipline, actually, good discipline means love. That's what good discipline, ask any good parent, that's what they'll tell you. Now, that's why, many of these events, I don't think God is upset. I wouldn't go that far. And again, who am I to understand God's mind? But to go to the root of the question, what is the root of the problem with all of what is going on between the coronavirus and the uprising? Before I spoke about the narrative, I will add one more root problem I see. And again, feel free to disagree with me thereafter. But I think the root of the problem really is the loss of values. Our society has lost many values. The founding fathers here in America were very religious people. Many of them spoke Hebrew fluently. We see that, you don't have to go far. You see that in the Constitution. You see how religious they were. One nation under God. Who speaks like that? In the dollar bill, you have in God we trust. Rabbi Stans likes to say that it's on the dollar bill and not in other places because the money has become our God. So in this God, in this green bill, that's what we trust in. But that's in a sarcastic way. But in any case, the founding fathers, I think, were very religious, were very devout. They had values, and they preached those values, and I think they infused those values in the foundations of this country. We grew, we prospered, and then the prophecy of Moses himself in the end of Deuteronomy, the prophecy of Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat, which means Jeshurun, relating to the Jewish people, will become fat. In other words, they'll prosper, they'll sink in their comfort zones, they'll be materialistic, and then Vayivat, and they'll start kicking God. They'll say, well, we're comfortable, we don't need God. And then I think that's what happened to our country, to this country in particular, and maybe to our world altogether. We've become so comfortable that we said to God, you know what, you stay there, I'll be here, let your values go there. Yes, I'll use them from time to time when it's convenient, but right now, if I'm comfortable doing A, B, and C that are not so moral, the things that are not so moral, I'll continue to do them. I think we see that, by the way, in very practical ways. I think the family unit has collapsed completely in America, which is, I think, a reflection of this loss of values. it's astounding that 54% people in this country divorce. Now, yes, some divorces are justified. I would be the first one to say that some divorces need to happen. Usually, I think divorce is the last resort, but yes, but 54% of this country has families that are fragmented, to put it lightly. I think that's a reflection. Again, many divorces are justified. Don't get me wrong. But I think many of these divorces are not. It's just because, you know what? Yeah, marriage is not a value anymore. So if it's broken, I'll go to Home Depot and get a new one, just like we relate to tools. That's a reflection of this loss of values. I think there's a lot of other maladies in society. So again, it's the loss of values that probably is the root of the problem. And therefore, I think that here at CBT and our community is in a good spot, because I see it already. I see it not just through the Zooms that we're having and through the outreach. I hate the word outreach. I've said it because I don't believe in outreach. I believe in inreach. But the work that we're doing on the outside, I see the thirst in people. I think people are searching for something that is much more spiritual, much more value-based. And because we've lost it for so long, we are now realizing the value of values. And so we're returning to it. This distance is creating a closeness that hopefully will last. So that, I think, is the root of the problem. I mean, the other roots of problems, I think, just to throw it out there, and I'll get to the other question, just to throw it out there. I think it's fascinating to me, it's amazing to me that we don't have leaders. Where have all the leaders gone? I mean, 75 years ago, during the Holocaust, the world leader, I'm not talking about the Jewish world right now, the world leader was Winston Churchill. His voice was heard. During the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, think whatever you want about him, but he was a voice. Where are those voices today? No leaders. Not on the Republican side, not on the Democratic side. I'm not going into politics. Not on the social side and not on the spiritual side. Not on the cultural side and not on the intellectual side. Where are those leaders? I don't see them. It's amazing. Now, I think there's a blessing to that. I think the decentralization of leadership has caused us now to assume more responsibility. Has caused us, in a way, to be leaders in our own right. And therefore, we have to be that change that we want to see in the world, as we spoke about before. We have to assume that leadership, that role of restoring the values that were so dear to the founding fathers of this country, to the foundations of the country, to our own lives, to our own neighborhoods, to our own societies. Anyhow, okay, that's next question. Okay. And then I have one final question here. Okay, dear Rabbi. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the details because this person unfortunately has lost his job with the coronavirus. He feels like his life is collapsing. I'm not going to go into it because he's going into details. It's more of a personal email, and I don't want to call him out. But the bottom line is this: how do I regain control of my life? So he feels like he lost his job, like his family is collapsing, and that his whole world is vanished. How do I regain control of my life? That's the bottom line question. First, I want to say to this person, and you know who you are, that I'd love to speak to you further, and I'm going to reach out to you via email too, and let's sit down for coffee and figure things out, because I have to hear the full picture. I'll try to help. I don't promise to, but I'll try to help. But secondly, I think I want to speak about a more general topic. I think that, when we lose control, our automatic response is this response: how can I regain control? But I'm going to give you an unconventional answer. And I'm going to give everyone who's felt the same feeling of losing control this unconventional answer. And I'd like to say that sometimes we shouldn't jump so quickly to try and regain control. I think the uncertainty that this coronavirus, that these riots have created, is in a way a great blessing, because we thought maybe in a very tangible way that everything was certain around us, and that's the real life. Real life equals certainty. Then all of a sudden this pandemic came about. All of a sudden we are now facing these riots that are creating the social uprising that like maybe we've never seen. And we say to ourselves, 1 second, all the things that we thought were certain, like your job, like this person is saying, or maybe like your family, that automatic love that was happening, is not so certain. So I come and say, well, maybe this is a lesson that we ought to embrace uncertainty as the only certain thing that really exists. And what I mean by that is sometimes that loss of balance is a blessing because it teaches us to dig deeper and to go into those anchors that are truly real, not those fake anchors like a job, not those fake anchors like, a good economy in this country, but real anchors like our relationships, like our values. Those are the anchors that are the only things that can truly be certain forever. I've attended enough funerals to know that when people die, unfortunately, I see this all the time, when people die, they change. The relatives of the person that died, all of a sudden change. Then all of a sudden they see the big picture. Then all of a sudden, so many of them said, I wish I knew this person more. And this death is going to teach me to connect to my family even more. Why? Because when people die, we are faced with the real vulnerability of life, the real uncertainty of life. We said to ourselves, we can die today, we can die tomorrow. Then we automatically ask ourselves, well then, what is certain? I thought life was certain, but it's not certain. And then we say, oh, maybe yes, I should now heal those relationships. I should go to those things that are really the true anchors of life. And I think, therefore, we should all use this opportunity in which we live in such an uncertain world to ask ourselves, well, let's check this list. This is uncertain. I thought it was. This is uncertain. I thought it was. What is certain? And I promise you, your answers and my answers will be the same. Will be your values. Will be your family. Maybe your very close friends. It will be your time with yourself, your time with your soul, your time with God. Those are the things that are really certain. There's a great expression in French that says that le plus ça change, le plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more things remain the same. Well, my Rabbi Steinsaltz, offers a nice twist to this. And he says the more things change, the more we rely on things that do not change. And think about experiencing a storm. When say you're out at sea, like that Talmudic story about Rabbi Akiva that we mentioned in the past. Say you're out at sea, your cruise ship sunk, and you have one log of wood. And that's the only thing that's keeping you alive. That's the only thing that's anchoring you. Everything is changed around you. But you search for that anchor, that log of wood to hold on to dear life. I think it's the same thing here. The more things change, the more we rely on those logs of wood. But if you don't have any logs of wood, then you'll drown. So use this time, and I'm saying this to the person again, beyond the continued communication that we'll have. But I'm saying this to this person. Grab that anchor, that real anchor, that anchor of your family, that anchor of your values, that anchor of your soul, and make that your permanent anchor. And then more things change, the more you'll see that those anchors will ensure your survival of those storms. There's a great story I want to reshare again. I haven't shared it in a long time. So, I have a friend who's also a rabbi in Miami, and he tells me very jokingly that, rabbis have three parts usually to their speeches. There's a joke, there's the content of it, the Dvar Torah, the substance, the thought, and then the third part is a story. So he says like this: jokes, you can only repeat once a year because that they remember. The story, once every 6 months. That they also remember, but less. The thought, you can repeat every week because that they'll forget quickly. So I think it's been 6 months since I've told this story, and I'm going to share this story in conclusion. But I remember living in Italy, Milano, Italy, and having the Rebbitzin of Italy, that's how she's known, the Bassi Garelik, come and speak with us. And she shared with us the great story of her moving to Italy from New York City, where she was born and raised. And she said that when she was about to leave, she was maybe, I forget, 20 years old. A teacher of her came to her and said, Bassi, what are you going to Italy? This was now 70 years ago, okay? What are you going to, no, maybe less, 60 years ago. She's, I think, 80 today, so 60 years ago. She says to her, Basi, why are you going to Italy? You should stay in New York. In New York, you have Jewish life, you have Jewish restaurants, you have Jewish schools, you have everything. The Jewish life here is vibrant. In Italy, there's nothing. You'll lose it all. You'll assimilate. And then she goes on to tell Basi, and she says to Basi, Basi, it's like taking hot water and mixing it with cold water. Eventually, the hot water will become cold. Right now, you're very hot. You'll get mixed with the cold waters of Italy. You'll lose your Jewish heat. You'll become very cold. Basi is a very sharp-minded woman. She responded immediately, and she said, you know what, you're right, teacher. If you take hot water and you mix it with cold water, the hot water becomes cold. But if the hot water remains on the fire, then no matter how much cold water you'll add to it, it will always be hot. I am remaining on my fire. And in a way, I think this is, if there's one lesson from these times, and specifically to this person here that just wrote to me this email, if there's one lesson to this uncertainty, is that we have to return to our fires. And if we weren't connected to them, let's reignite them. If we were connect them, let's see how we can heighten the flames a little bit, so that the fire really becomes the only certain things in our life that will indeed last forever and ever. That's